Fortsättningen från början.
I'm just trying.
So, colleagues, I think we'll start now. We gave a couple of minutes to colleagues who are joining late, but at the moment we have more than 60 people, so I think we can start. We also have a full agenda, and everyone who's joining in a bit later could also watch the recording afterwards if they miss anything. So with that, I hope everybody can hear me fine. And well, I hope people can also see me. I turned on my video just for the opening remarks. I think that's how we are going to do it in order to preserve the bandwidth for people who are joining from places where you don't have such good internet, like my house. My name is Ela Serdaroğlu. I'm the global co-lead of the Global Shelter Cluster on behalf of the IFRC. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone. And it's our pleasure, also on behalf of my co-lead Brett Moore from UNHCR, to welcome all of you at the opening session of the annual meeting of the Global Shelter Cluster for this year, 2021. So we had hoped, actually, last year when we did our meeting, we had hoped to be able to meet each other in person this time around, and back then it really seemed like a possibility. 8 or 9 months, we were very hopeful that things will go better. Luckily, it's getting better at the moment, but not enough to allow us to see each other. But while there are certain disadvantages to meeting online, and probably everybody is really sick and tired of it, there are also definitely some positive sides, like we don't have to deal with the capacity of the IFRC's meeting room, and we don't have to deal with visa issues, and anyone who wants to join and contribute to our discussions and participate and learn can do so. So actually the threshold for us to come together and discuss things that are of importance to us has increased greatly. So also, in order to make the discussions more available, we will be recording all of the sessions and they will be posted online. So I just want to remind everyone of that. So also this session is being recorded, and you'll be able to access everything afterwards on the Shelter Cluster website. So as you know, this year's theme for our annual meeting is shelter and settlements in a changing environment. So in the coming 2 weeks, we will be discussing and strategizing about the changes in our sector and what we need to do to be part of the change, while actually also maybe driving the change, and to remain agile, flexible, and relevant, to provide the support that we aim to provide to the people that we serve. So environment itself is also going to be a big part of our discussions in this year's agenda, as well as collaborating with each other, but also with different sectors and across the board with different stakeholders. So in order to look forward, we need to first take stock, of course, of where we came from and where we are now. And today's opening session is meant to serve that purpose. We will, after my opening remarks, we will be diving into our achievements. So in this session, we'll be going over our collective achievements and highlights of the past year, and start already exchanging on the next steps for the coming year, which will actually take us to the last year of our current strategy. So our current strategy is until the end of 2022. It's really important for us to know what we have been able to achieve so that we can also chart our way going forward. As the Global Shelter Cluster and our partners, all of you will be focusing on implementing the two really important and big grants with your support and contribution, of course, as well as continuing to seek synergies and opportunities to compound the impact of our work, our joint work, while joining hands and minds to overcome the challenges, the evolving challenges and concerns that are always there. So without further ado, I think we should move on. Obviously, you're here to hear from each other and not just from me and Brett, maybe. So I will be handing over to Brett Moore, my dear co-lead. Of course, everybody knows him as well. And of course, in this session, we will be supported by Miguel Urquia from UNHCR and Pablo Medina from IFRC, our deputies, and also the global support team. And in addition to that, Leanne Marshall from Australian Red Cross and Augusto Come from Impact will be also supporting the facilitation of this course. So you'll be seeing them maybe typing some instructions and guiding the discussion. So thanks to everyone who made this session possible. And of course, thanks to all of you for joining. I see more than 80 people online. So let's get started, and happy meeting and networking. So Brett, over to you.
Thanks very much, Ella. Thank you for the opening remarks, kind words, and welcome everybody. It's really wonderful to see so many people online. We'll just start with a brief run through the agenda. Ella has mentioned some of the highlights, but with the agenda, you can see Miguel has shared the screen. We'll just go through the achievements report for the year very briefly, just to cast our minds back on everything that's happened. Well, not necessarily in the past 12 months, but close to that. As you all know, we've now rescheduled our global meeting from the tradition of October to June. This was based on some unanimous feedback from cluster coordinators and many others involved that it would suit the year's activities better and not interrupt so much with the annual planning processes and HRP commitments. So that's why we're meeting at this time of the year, even though the most recent meeting was, of course, last October, and many of you will have been online for that. So I'll take you through a few highlights of the achievements report, and then Pablo and Miguel will take us through the next 2 weeks, where we'll be going with that. We'll have some Jamboard and we'll collaborate and get your ideas. And so that'll be coming up in the second half of this meeting. So without further ado, Miguel, can you please go on with the next slide for the achievements report? And thank you, Renee. We've posted the full report online there in the chat. So for many of you who haven't seen the report, the full version is there with all the details and descriptions of the activities and the outcomes. Yeah, next slide, please. That's it. So just as a quick recap, many of you will be very familiar with the strategy. For those of you that are joining newly into this annual meeting for this year, just to recall for everyone, as Ella mentioned too, we have our 2018 to 2022 Global Shelter Cluster Strategy, and that's comprised of 4 pillars, and you can see each of the 4 there in front of you: coordination, advocacy, evidence-based response, and capacity, with the overall aim of strengthen shelter and settlement responses that build resilient communities. So we're around halfway through our strategy, and soon we'll be undertaking a light midterm review seeing how we've gone and looking at some of the cumulative impacts over the last couple of years and what additional capacity or focus we need to do for the final 12 to 18 months of the strategy. Next slide, please. As I mentioned in the chat, there's the full report and you can see all the details there of the activities. Just as a quick highlight for everyone for 2020, we've got around 30 active clusters at the moment. When we look at the global partners and all of the partners at field level, we have 804. So we're now coordinating very widely in very many contexts around the world, natural disaster and conflict. We disaggregate our data gathering process as well. And we've got, so there's no double counting and no replication. We've reached 6.4 million people with Shelter and 10.4 million people with NFI support in 2020. At the moment, we have some of the highest recorded funding received. $646 million goes through the cluster to support field operations. But of course, we do know that the funding received is actually still indicates a large gap compared to the identified needs. We've also undertaken 244 days of field support and 727 remote days. We maintain this data as we have done for several years as part of the initial ECHO grant, and it's very good to be able to see our cumulative effects and impact over the last couple of years. So there's some good analysis there that we are happy to share in the future as well. Last year we had our first online annual meeting and it was a huge event, and I think by the way things are going and the number of people that have registered for this year, we'll probably have even more people participating this year than last year. I think it's also a function of everyone being familiar with online meetings, online processes. We're certainly getting better at online collaboration ourselves, utilising more tools and becoming more accustomed to this way of working. And as Ella mentioned as well, although it's a pity not to be face-to-face because there's a huge amount of benefit that comes with the face-to-face networking, getting to know each other, reuniting with friends, meeting new friends, that when we do have online participation, we have a large number of people that would not otherwise be able to be part of this meeting. And then a quick overview, and I'll go more into this in the next couple of slides, but we've got some key pieces of guidance developed within 2020 as well, including the update of the coordination toolkit and the information management toolkit, and also the publishing and launch of rental market guidance. And of course, the COVID-19 resource library, which we did cover in last year's session, but which has been also updated and populated with new information and resources coming through from all the cluster partners and the field cluster coordinators as well. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, around 30 active clusters at the moment. We can see where they are there. We have 19 related to conflict activations and 11 related to natural disaster, many of them in preparedness mode. We have 3 ongoing level 3 system-wide emergencies, and also earlier last year we had the activation of the DRC cluster, which was previously a merged and co-led cluster, and that's changed. We can see there where the clusters are activated by region, Asia Pacific, Middle East, North Africa, and Africa, and by the type of crisis and by lead agency. So that's a brief overview. We can also find more detailed breakdown of that and field level activation leadership in the full report. Next slide, please. So in terms of the global shelter cluster support team activities, we break down the support that we give globally by in-country and remote support, and also regional support, the total number of support days, and by what kind of support is available, whether it's technical, information management, or coordination related. and also by region where the support is focused. Now, of course, you'll see that most of that correlates to where most of the clusters are activated. So the data is there, and it is quite clear the bulk of the activities really go to support the clusters in Africa where most of them are activated. You can also see that the leading country in terms of support requirements and received was Syria and the overall Syria situation response. Next slide, please. So on this slide, you can see really the number of people receiving assistance and then the value of that assistance as well. You can see that there's also quite a strong correlation between the financial support for the Syria situation, predominantly cross-border support from Gaziantep, also a large quantity of support in Syria and Yemen as well. This is an interesting graph which is showing the correlation around this. You can see some of the less well-funded responses, some of the protracted responses. You can see that there's a lot more support required, for example, for situation in Cameroon, Mali, Central African Republic, and also some of the ongoing work that's happening more in terms of preparedness and risk reduction, Philippines, Indonesia, and some of the most vulnerable locations in Asia. Thanks. Next slide, please. And the gap. As mentioned, although the funding received via the cluster is the largest that we have had so far compared to previous years, there's still a huge gap. And there's a large disproportionate aspect to which clusters receive funding and which ones do not. We can see on average, clusters are around 30% funded, but we see that there's a huge variation on those figures from country to country, and there's still a large gap. So we do call on all donors. We have good support from many of our donors, but there's still a lot of inequity in the support where we're targeted, and also the support from other key donors as well. So we're looking forward to continued and escalated commitment with that, and also reaching out for more localized support, closer collaboration with the private sector and other actors as well. Thanks. Next slide, please. So we'll go for a very brief overview of the 4 pillars. On the coordination pillar, as mentioned, and with more details available in the full report, we've made good progress in terms of the working groups and communities of practice. And I'll give you a bit more example of that later, but one of the main transitions that we've had this year is moving the cash coordination group to become a community of practice from a working group. So that means a broader and more sustained support on a range of issues. Normally with working groups, we have them time-bound and task-specific. So they're really there to deliver on a particular set of activities and then disband. We've also had good coordination support for COVID-19, and that of course comes through a much stronger health lens. And we had some extensive focus on that in last year's meeting. No doubt it'll be a big focus of this year's meeting as well, and mainstream throughout all the sessions. Next slide, please. So for advocacy, I'm pleased to announce that as supported through the BHA grant and then the upcoming ECHO grant, once it's fully signed, we have a specific focus on advocacy. Advocacy was one of the pillars of the strategy, which was frankly, a little poorly supported. And so we've made specific focus on that, and we'll be making good progress going forward. We are about to appoint an advocacy officer who will become part of the global cluster support team, and we're all delighted for that. And so from that, we'll be developing a specific advocacy strategy, advocacy products, support to country level clusters and their specific advocacy needs, and linking that out through the wider coordination processes and communication processes within the humanitarian system. One thing that was very clear for us was that there was a strong linkage between our focus on increasing resources for the cluster at the field level to really meet the gaps on the ground, as I had previously mentioned, and our ability to advocate for that adequately with the right kind of data and evidence-based response. So linking the new advocacy role through to progress made with research as well. We hope to kind of close the circle on a lot of these issues and get better synergy across the process of building data, building results from field country progress, aggregating that at the global level, producing the right kinds of information and advocacy products, and coming through with some really strong advocacy processes and material to support everybody out there, everybody in their own organisations, and also all the field cluster coordinators in their particular country level issues. Earlier last year as well, it already seems like quite a long time ago already, we had the World Urban Forum. We were involved in that. Both Ella and I and many of the SAG colleagues attended the forum in Abu Dhabi and participated in a wide variety of sessions. And we've also continued with the information management products. Each of the cluster coordinators feed through into monthly updates. So we do have the system in place producing results. And also the global updates. You'll see that we've ramped up our ability to send out regular global updates. And so that'll be a feature that'll be increasing as we go on as well. Next slide, please. As mentioned, in one of our focus areas being evidence-based response, this third pillar, we have appointed, with the support of Habitat for Humanity, who've contributed resources to this part of the overall cluster effort, and supported by BHA as well, is a research officer. And this is also building on the collaborative efforts as well with Interaction and the work being done there around research priorities, and many of our academic partners as well who are concentrating efforts in this space. So throughout this year, we'll be able to also see a ramp up of efforts building on the progress made from last year. Thanks very much. Next slide, please. So one of the main areas that we usually focus on for the year is the Global Cluster Coordinators Training. Last year, of course, it was online, and we are yet to find the suitable time for recommencing face-to-face training. We hope to do so later in the year, potentially, if the situation continues to improve, but that's subject to policies from the organisations and the situation that we're also in here in Geneva. There's been a range of other activities undertaken as well, a lot of field level training, remote training, and even amidst the complicated situation we've all faced throughout last year and continue to face, we've still undertaken field missions, and there was extensive missions to Syria, Indonesia. We've had missions to many other countries as well for a more limited but still effective face-to-face support. And also a lot of products and guidance being produced by HLP, Focal Point. We have country level profiles, we have environment profiles, rental guidance, tip sheets, and a huge range of resources now available on the website, some which is generic and useful for everybody, and others that are more country specific. So we do encourage everybody to keep consulting with the materials on the website, and you'll find a lot of resources there to aid in your own internal capacity development, but also for field cluster coordinators as well. And next slide, please. So this concludes my overview of the achievements for this year. I think that you'll all agree it's been, although remote, still a busy year and a really intense series of activities. It still has supported the field cluster. We're moving, as I said, toward a different phase in the maturity of the cluster, the coordination approaches and what we offer and how we offer it. And I still think that there's a lot of great work being done, a huge amount of work coming up. We thank our key donors for supporting us and all the collective efforts of the Global Cluster Support Team, the actors and agencies in our strategic advisory group, and of course the efforts of all the field cluster coordinators who are really supporting the response and agencies at field level. So without further ado, I will conclude this session. I'll hand over to Miguel and to Pablo now to briefly take us through the next segment for this session, which will be utilizing Jamboard. So just a quick overview for all of you of how to use Jamboard and how we can go forward with that. But thanks again to your participation and your attention, and I'll hand over to Miguel and Pablo. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett, and hi everyone. I am Pablo Medina. For those who don't know me, I'm the Deputy Global Shelter Cluster Coordinator on behalf of IFRC. And Miguel and I are going to be talking to you about, Brett has presented the success over the past year, the achievements, and Miguel and I are going to talk to you a little bit about the future, what are current plans, particularly through the lens of two grants that the Global Shelter Cluster has received, one from USAID, the Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance, and another one from ECHO. But before we do that, I wanted to briefly introduce you to Jamboard. Some of you by now might be familiar with this tool. It's simply an online tool that replicates the flip chart or the whiteboard that we used to do when we had face-to-face meetings. And you can access this tool through that link that is pasted in the chat of the meeting right now. If you click on that link, you should be able to join the Jamboard. You will get a screen like what you were seeing a minute ago. Yes, you would get that a screen that has four quadrants. So we're going to be asking your input as Miguel and I talk about the initiatives that we are currently implementing and that we are going to implement in the future. We would ask for your input as we speak on four issues. What other synergies or contributions the Global Shelter Cluster partners, you as representatives of your organization, can make towards the initiatives that we are talking about. You might have a project that is looking at greening the response as well, or you might be interested in a particular project that we mentioned and that you would like to make a contribution. That would be the first quadrant. Then on the right, what concerns on overlaps there might be. Something sounds familiar to you that you're actually already done some work on that, or there might already some plans in your agency. Please feel free to provide that input there. Now at the bottom left on opportunities, what opportunities there are for the Global Shelter Cluster to maximize the impact of these plans? What opportunities do you see? And also what challenges on the bottom right? What challenges you foresee for the Global Shelter Cluster plans that we'll be discussing? So to be able to provide your input, all you have to do is click on the left-hand side. There is a menu, a vertical menu. You just click, or otherwise you can replicate one of those post-its. See, you can duplicate the post-it and write your input there. We'll have two volunteers, Liana and Augusto from the Strategic Advisory Group, Impact Australian Red Cross, that will be organizing your input. And after Miguel and I have presented the plans and the activities of the cluster that we are currently and will be doing in the future with these two grants, we will go through that input and discuss a little bit in plenary some of the things that you have shared there. I hope this is clear. I hope you all have access to the Jamboard, but if you don't or you have any problems, please write that on the chat, and there will be other colleagues of the Global Shelter Cluster supporting, helping you out to be able to access this Jamboard and provide your input. Thank you very much. Feel free to start providing input as we speak, but also please pay some attention. Okay, next slide, please. I will be talking about the activities that we will be implemented through the Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance of USAID grants. which is titled Enhancing the Capacity and Quality of the Humanitarian Shelter and Settlement Response. So the overall goal of the grant is particularly to more effectively meet the emergency and transitional humanitarian shelter needs of the people affected by humanitarian crisis. The focus of the grant is on the emergency and transitional needs. It goes to the core of the shelter cluster work. We have two results in the grant. The first one focuses on, the result one is focuses on increasing the coordination and response capacity through better planning and implementation processes. And the second result focuses on a better integrated system of analysis and learning, which will inform policy and guidance of the global shelter cluster and country level clusters, and also will inform better practice. So first one, increase coordination and response capacity. Second one, better system of analysis and learning for better policy and practice. Next slide, please. Within those two results, we have a number of activities. Under the first result, we have 3 activities. Search capacity for preparedness and response. The definition of search capacity, maybe the name search capacity is a bit narrow, it's more than search, it's also ongoing support capacity to country level clusters. So it's search and support capacity for preparedness and response. Then we have the second activity on localization, capacity building, preparedness and outreach. And the third activity of the first result is analyze, learn and improve responses. I will go through what sub-activities there are under each of those a bit later on in the presentation. Then for the second result, we have 2 activities, one supporting advocacy policy and guidance of the global shelter cluster. The second activity is increase access to information and knowledge. Next slide, please. So this grant, the time frame for the implementation of the USAID grant is from October last year to September next year. So overall 2 years. The total funding provided by USAID is nearly $2 million. You can see it at the bottom of the slide. Obviously, there is co-funding as well for about the same amount. Now, the funding for this grant is divided in three distinct elements. The funding that goes to Global Shelter Cluster partners, the funding that goes to UNHCR as co-lead agency for conflict, and the funding that goes to IFRC for co-lead agency for natural disasters. I must mention, though, that the funding that goes to UNHCR is also channeled through partners. It is partners that receive the funding and then they second those resources to UNHCR. The grant management cost that supports all 3 elements of the funding is there as well, for a total direct cost of 1.8 million and indirect cost of $0.2 million. Next slide, please. We had a process for the selection of partners that took place. We launched a call for proposals in February, and we conducted 2 webinars with partners that were interested to apply to explain the process, the criteria for the selection of partners, and the type of activities that could be funded through this grant. We received 83 project proposals, which is a lot, from 23 different agencies, and a selection committee that was composed of IFRC, UNHCR, as some agencies that volunteer from the Global Shelter Cluster Strategic Advisory Group, went through the proposals and finally selected 13 agencies to allocate over $1 million over $1 million Swiss francs, because the contracts from IFRC, the recipient of the grant, are in Swiss francs, to those 17, 18 initiatives that the selection committee chose. Next slide, please. I'll go into the details of the activities. So for the first activity, the search and support capacity for preparedness and response, this is primarily search capacity, what we call the global focal points or the roving coordinators that provide immediate search or additional capacity to country level clusters, either when a new cluster is activated, when there is a new surge in the displacement or caused by conflict or a natural disaster, or when there is a gap as well. So in addition to the existing capacity that the cluster has, this grant is supporting 2 positions for housing, land and property. We had this in the past supported by ECHO, and the demand was bigger than the supply. So we have 1 additional global focal point this time to support the needs of country-level clusters in housing, land and property issues. We also have 2 positions for senior roving cluster coordinators and 2 positions for senior roving information managers that provide capacity for up to 3 months, while the regular recruitment is able to contract the required capacity both for coordination and for information management. This is funds channeled through the partners. IFRC is also receiving some funding for global focal point for coordination, also such capacity. Next slide, please. The second activity on localization, capacity building, preparedness and outreach, we have 3 distinct activities. 1 in relation to capacity building, preparedness and outreach, the second one related to localization related initiatives, and the third one related to online trainings. Within the capacity building, preparedness and outreach activities, the projects that have been selected include training on shelter coordination by Caritas Bangladesh and CRS in Bangladesh at the national and provincial levels. We also have funding for social media awareness campaigns of the diaspora initiative led by IOM. They have an agreement with Facebook to be able to trace these social media campaigns. We also are supporting the development of a directory of local vendors for the Americas Shelter Cluster or the Red Light Shelter Working Group. We're also supporting an initiative on contingency planning in Nepal's districts to be able to bring down to the district level the national contingency plan and provide more localized capacity. And then trainings by CARE in Northwest Syria on shelter response modalities and cash for shelter. Now, within the localization initiatives, we are also funding a number of projects. A lot of them are related to translation. We are going to translate the settlements approach guidance note through the working group into Spanish and French, and the tools and courses or training developed under the Wood Shelter Programming Working Group. We're going to translate that to Arabic, Spanish, and French. We're going to conduct a capacity and training needs assessment for the Americas Shelter Cluster, and based on that, see what trainings we can provide in response to that capacity and training needs assessment. And then we are going to develop shelter response profiles. Some of those you already have them available in the Global Shelter Cluster website, but they provide a good background about a particular response that helps inform the development of Global Shelter Cluster strategies and shelter programs from different cluster partners in that country or involved in that particular response. There are some examples in the website if you want to look at those shelter response profiles. The last activity is in relation to online trainings. So we are currently almost finished with the updating of the Global Shelter Cluster online training, More Than Just a Roof, that has also funding from the Australian Red Cross. And we're going to translate that, the More Than Just a Roof, as well into, if I remember right, Spanish, we are already almost there, French and Arabic. Then we have, we're going to develop through the Urban Settlements Working Group and based on the existing material, a settlements approach online training, and then another training on contextualized analysis of local building cultures, which is going to be done by Crater. Next slide, please. On the result 2, we also have a number of activities that we are supporting. So in relation to advocacy and research, we are going to have for the next, until the end of the grant, global focal point for research that will be coordinating with existing research initiatives, make sure that there is no overlap, taking forward the past analysis done by the cluster or by cluster partners on current research gaps, and also an agenda for research that actually Interaction is going to present, if I don't remember right, on Wednesday, or is going to launch on Wednesday. So this global focal point for research is going to coordinate existing research initiatives of the cluster and make sure that we build synergies, as well as perhaps be able to access through some of the partners research grants that so far the Global Shater cluster has not been, except for some specific partners, has not been able to access. And we also have a global focal point for advocacy that will help us take forward, based on that research and based on the priority established by the cluster partners at this meeting and also by the SAC, we'll be able to take forward the advocacy role of the cluster. We will also be supporting country-level assessment, monitoring, and evaluation activities. In particular, you may be familiar with the REACH assessments, not only damage and needs assessments, but also monitoring and evaluation exercises, usually at the outcome level. We will also be supporting regional shelter fora, Asia Pacific, MENA, Africa, and Americas regional shelter fora, where we will be able to share practice and learn from each other, as well as support the flagship publication Shelter Projects that outlines some good practice and not so good practice as well. We can learn from both on different shelter projects across the world. There have been many editions of this initiative already, so I'm pretty sure many of you are very familiar with it. The grant will also be supporting the translation of this publication. And finally, the second activity on the result 2 is it will support the work of the Global Shelter Cluster working groups and communities of practice, as well as the SAC and the Donor Consultation Group. So we'll be supporting initiatives of the Disability Inclusion Working Group, the Environment Community of Practice with more environmental profiles, a new, hopefully, and do not miss the Shelter and Health thematic session on Wednesday, maybe an intercluster working group on shelter and health, the Vulnerability Classification Working Group, the Urban Settlements Working Group, Construction Standards, Promoting Safer Building of Self-Recovery Working Group, and the Diaspora Engagement Working Groups. All of them will receive some support from this grant. Next slide. The last activity, which is not here because it's being implemented directly by IFRC, is obviously the continuous development and maintenance of the Global Shater Cluster website. New exciting developments coming along, including integrated learning platform that will make it a lot easier to do online trainings through the Global Shater Cluster website, as well as facilitate translation, among others, into Arabic, and many more improvements to the website and the app. Next slide, please. This is an overview of how the funding was allocated amongst partners, with NORCAP, which is hosting the senior roving coordinators and the senior information managers receiving the biggest amount of the funding, and then the other agencies, as you can see there. Next slide, please. That was the last slide. So I will now hand over to Miguel, who will talk to you about some of the activities that the cluster is planning to take forward with the ECHO grant. I'll look at the questions on the chat. Feel free to continue to make questions in the chat and also to provide your input in the Jamboard. Miguel, over to you.
Thank you very much, Pablo. My name is Miguel Urquía. I'm the Global Shelter Cluster Deputy Coordinator on behalf of UNHCR, Pablo's counterpart in UNHCR. And I'm going to talk about another project that we're having this year, kindly funded by ECHO. ECHO have been supporting us for a few years in the past. Actually, this will be our fourth project with ECHO. So this is a fantastic support that will help the cluster advance on greening the shelter response. Maybe before we start explaining the project, just to point out that ECHO has identified a number of areas for greening the humanitarian response. And we wanted to point out that our project will work in a number of those. So out of the 7 areas, 5 of them will be covered through the project, which I think it's very nice to show that we are in line with that ECHO's approach and covering many of the areas. Other areas such as greening the organization's logistics, this is covered by the own organization through, for instance, issues such as greening the blue of the UN agencies or greening the orange of NRC. And then the point on implementing a robust waste management system, this is covered by other clusters, not necessarily by ours. So to explain briefly the project, it will start actually on the 1st of July 2021 for 24 months. As you can see, there is a total cost of around a bit less than 1 million, of which 70% or 650,000 euro are contribution from ECHO. The rest of the funding is coming from the cluster lead agencies, UNHCR and IFRC, and by the partners that will be participating in this. In this case, for the BHA grant, IFRC receives the funding and disperses to partners. For the ECHO grant, is UNHCR who will receive on behalf of the cluster, and using a very similar process as the one used in the past 3 ECHO grants and the one used by IFRC for the BHA grant, we will pass through the funds to the partners. The project, basically, it's working at the global level and at the country level to make shelter responses greener. So, as we know, shelter interventions are life-saving and very important, and the idea is not to reduce that life-saving nature of shelter interventions. They will continue being as efficient as possible and as effective, but the idea is to make them also greener without affecting the performance, of course. We want to continue reaching as many people as possible and with the best possible outcome. But in this case, we believe that the interventions can be greener in several aspects. So there are 3 activities. One of them is happening at the global level, and the other 2, a combination of global and country. The first activity is about supporting shelter partners to green their responses. So we're going to be looking at the most purchased emergency shelter and NFIs items and look at those specifications and see how they can become greener without reducing their performance. For instance, looking at the content of plastic, perhaps that plastic can be reduced or it can become recycled plastic instead of virgin plastic. Perhaps some of the packaging can be, which is plastic that is only used once for wrapping, maybe we can remove that plastic and replace it with paper or with other products that have a smaller impact in the environment. So that's one of the activities. The other one would be about recycling some of these global products, how they can be recycled or reused or other afterlife use of them. Looking at sustainable energy options, because we realize that when we are planning, very often shelter partners are not, we are not that familiar with the different energy options, and it will be, this project will help choose the right one in different ways, but by guiding partners and shelter practitioners on what are the pros and cons of the different energy solutions. Also, we will put in place a methodology to measure the amount of CO2 and plastic that shelter responses have. That way, once that we measure, we will know if we are reducing or not, and hopefully strive towards a reduction. The second activity is working on research, environmental research and advocacy. So the key outcome of this activity will be the production of environmental country profiles, which will help country-level clusters and partners implement shelter operations in a more environmentally friendly way. Through the advocacy function that has been mentioned in BHA, this interventions will be disseminated, and also there will be a better understanding of the importance of looking at long-term solutions in shelter. Very often we see that sometimes decision makers are not aware of the implications of using emergency shelter responses, or don't realize that perhaps other type of responses can be used for longer term, that will not only have a better impact in the lives of people, but also in the environment. And then the third activity is about supporting. This one is happening fully at the country level, and it replicates a little bit what we mentioned about the first one, of ensuring that the shelter responses are greener, and this will be done through the use of market interventions, through the use of appropriate local solutions and materials, and then the same as the previous one, helping to reduce, reuse, repurpose, recycle, measure better the CO2, this time of local shelter solutions, and then linking with other clusters. This project, half of the budget will be implemented by partners, and then 1/3 by UNHCR and 20% by IFRC, and there will be, you see the contributions in co-funding that we are expecting from the different partners. The 7 activities that will be implemented by partners will be launched, will be implemented through expressions of interest that will be launched in the coming weeks. So partners, if you are interested in implementing these activities, watch out for this call for expressions of interest. They will happen in the through the global updates, the same global updates that we've been announcing this meeting, and that's how we will launch this expression of interest. So now we will move on to hearing from you, hearing what you thought of these plans and whether there are ways that your organization can contribute. So we will be going to the Jamboard and looking at your interventions. So if you haven't been able to write everything you wanted in the Jamboard, this is your opportunity. We will give a few seconds for you to write those slides, those post-its. Let me change the slide, one moment, and go to the Jamboard. Wow, we see that it's pretty full. So I will hand over now to Liane and Augusto to look at the Jamboard. Thank you.
Hello, Miguel. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Indeed, the Jamboard is very colorful. A lot of contributions from different partners. We're gonna just present a bit the main points we see there, and get perhaps a reaction from Ella and Brett. I would start with the contributions on the synergies. So there are a few general comments, including that in order to synergize, would be great to share the actual project plans for these 2 big grants, so that we can, so that partners can really identify synergies with the projects that they have. And the other thing is a general comment on the need to really ensure that agency-based shelter and strategies are aligned with the one of the global shelter cluster. There is a contributor who flagged that, especially for the ECHO grant, there is an initiative called the Environment and Humanitarian Assistance, who where to find out more metrics, and there are a lot of opportunities there to synergize with the grant from ECHO. I will stop here for now, and then perhaps point out a few specific points that were flagged by other partners that are way more specific.
Thanks, Augusto. That's great for the overview. I mean, Miguel, it's good that you're zooming in on that particular part of the Jamboard. And I think between Augusto, Liane, Ella, and I, we can kind of pick up on some of the key threads. HLP AOR is very engaged. I can't kind of see something there. Yeah, HLP very willing to engage in GSC membership. Okay, opportunities exist to co-develop guidance. I mean, clearly, I think, and maybe one of the sessions tomorrow, the second session tomorrow is on navigating the nexus. So there's a lot of issues, of course, related to durable solutions, development outcomes for shelter, and many of our partners are working already right throughout the spectrum of response, from preparedness, to humanitarian response, right through to durable solutions, permanent shelter. And so I think really to get success on that side, there's a good opportunity for really incorporating HLP issues, but obviously right from the beginning, but also very much to ensure good outcomes at the end. I mean, I think that's an interesting point there around shelter and NFI strategies to be aligned to the global shelter cluster strategy. I think that that's important, but of course it's also contingent upon contingent upon the broad brush of the global shelter cluster strategy to make sure that we can include the different kinds of activities. I think it's very important for agencies to link through and report so that when we're doing the overall monitoring, and as I mentioned, we will have some kind of midterm review for the current strategy, that we can gather all the inputs of our partners as well to see how we're going on that. That's important. Leadership boost to regional, national coordination capacity. Yeah, very important. Australian Red Cross, current contribution, that's well noted. Ella, which are the main ones that are kind of catching your eye there? Criteria working on a tool.
I'm reading a couple of notes around existing environmental tools, existing initiatives, or starting ones. I think that's something that we really need to look at. Joining hands and efforts. Of course, there are many partners who are already looking at this, who are maybe somewhat more advanced. Maybe they have been looking from different angles. So we're really not trying to reinvent the wheel or start from zero. Of course, I think one of the main tasks of the new global focal point for environment is going to map these efforts and see how we can bring them all together, because maybe there are some things that already exist and we can just collaborate more intensively to reach the outcomes. Maybe there are some gaps and maybe we need to look at some other things from different angles. There's also not one solution, of course, for reducing environmental impact. We're also looking at supporting decision makers in making the optimum decision, obviously. So I think there's going to be a lot of soul searching and talking around the environmental initiatives to make sure that we're all able to contribute and move forward together as a sector. I think that's also very specifically mentioned in the project with ECHO, that will try to align with what's already out there, and we'll try to find the gap to benefit the entire sector. So that's what I'm seeing quite a lot. I think that will also, of course, link in with a couple of other things. I see the construction strategy, which of course links in a lot with sustainability as well. Yes. Yeah, I see a lot of thoughts around cross-sectoral collaboration and environment.
Yeah, I think that one you mentioned, Ella, and I can see something there around Crotaire's work, University of Bath's work. I know that, through the environment community of practice, that we're also working on, incorporating the tools of some of the actors which are looking at carbon calculation of shelter interventions, environmental remediation guidelines. So I know that many agencies are working on specific tools as well. So I think that they'll be coming up throughout the process too. Yeah. What do you think? Should we go over to concerns and overlaps? Should we go over to the square that you're working on, Leanne, if you want to give us an overview of what the issues that seem to be bubbling to the surface and what's happening there?
Yeah, sure, Brett. There's one that's just arrived, I think someone's writing on, but basically there is a little bit in one section that's just around overlap and coordination with other agencies, or a lack of coordination between sectors, but that need for more integrated response, and then like really trying to dig into that distinction between humanitarian and sort of more development actions. So there's that concern overlap. There's a little bit here about too many working groups. And maybe, maybe some of that is overlapping, and maybe we're actually expending probably too much energy, I think, around that. And a new one there around many agencies working on the same thing. And then I guess a concern that's come out of this one, and it was also in the challenges as well, is that then we might have a lot of working groups doing things and people working on tools, but then there's a lack of implementation of the knowledge that's exchanged through those working groups. So how do we ensure that anything that's produced through those working groups can be kind of passed on and is taken up by the clusters, I guess. A little bit, about the difference around coordination structures being quite different in context. And I think this concern overlap is quite interesting because it really is thinking about that need for analysis around localization and focus around how we might be doing things differently in different places, not just having that kind of one way of doing things. There's also obviously turnover of staff is also always a concern in terms of making sure that things get taken forward. And the two ones that sort of are sitting alone there are around, how are we going to maintain the shelter sectoral technical expertise as we continue advancing area-based approaches. So I think that's probably the big, and then obviously ECHO grant activity to other projects, making sure that we're not, again, recreating anything in the work that we're taking on as part of these new grants.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Leanne. That's a really good overview. There's a few there that I've kind of picked up on, and Ella, please also, if any there really grab your attention. I mean, one thing, there's a fair bit of effort happening at the global level between cross-cluster collaboration and then how that's reflected at field level. We were part of the OCHA Global Workshop last Monday. There was a morning and an afternoon session where we were looking at the role of intercluster coordination groups at field level. So each of the clusters have the cluster lead at field level as part of the intercluster coordination group, and then that has representation into the HCT, the humanitarian country teams. So making sure that the terms of reference of these intercluster coordination groups are effective, that they're well functioning. The leadership of the ICCGs is by the OCHA intercluster coordinator to make sure that that's well resourced and functioning as well. The Global Cluster Coordinators group here in Geneva that Ella and I participate in, we've been working on those terms of reference last year before they were disseminated. So there's an increased focus on that. Of course, that's not the complete remedy. It requires all the agencies at field level and the cluster coordinators to really pay attention to that, to make sure that there are specific synergies, and we know this from our work. For example, specific relationships between shelter and WASH, shelter and health, especially in the context of COVID. So there are some relationships amongst all these clusters that are more synergistic and working closer together than some of the others. So I think the priorities are working there. And within each of your own agencies, the shelter officer, shelter and settlement officer will be working closely with a WASH officer. Sometimes they may even be the same. So we do rely on the coherent processes within each of our partner agencies to make sure that works as well. Noted on the working groups, that's one of the reasons why we transitioned the cash working group to a COP, to a community of practice. The coordination overlap with other agencies, OCHA, I think that I kind of commented on that, but I agree that there are some issues there that we need to always keep monitoring, and they do differ from country to country quite a bit. I think it's a really important thing, Ella, and maybe have some comments on this as well around the utilization of the tools and resources. I mean, the Global Shelter Cluster, we do produce a lot of information, a lot of guidance. We'd like to think it's all worthwhile and useful, but it's really up to the partners to make sure that they can find methods to pick that up and utilize what they can in their own agencies, and that the field cluster coordinators, I mean, in light of increased emphasis on decentralization, on localization, there's a lot more emphasis on the field cluster coordinators to make sure that these tools and processes are being picked up as appropriate at country level. So giving support to that and making sure we can encourage that, I think, is really important, especially with the key partners, with the government, to make sure that good environmental processes are in place to try to achieve good HLP outcomes, and especially when there's complicated legal or legislative processes that need to be negotiated. So yeah, there's a lot more emphasis and responsibility on that. Admittedly, turnover is a problem. It's a problem in all our agencies, trying to keep predictable, clear capacity, making sure that our field cluster coordinators are adequately supported, that there's information management officers there when there needs to be, and that there's technical working groups established to really help further the uptake and localization of a lot of this guidance, which admittedly is quite generic sometimes, but that's also on purpose to make sure it can be more easily adapted to country-specific contexts. I'll hold my comments there, Ella, if there's anything from you. And otherwise, we can go to the next segment there, the next square.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on that one outlying one that seems to be outlying, but in my mind, it's also maybe a little bit linked to the integrated response posted. I mean, I think when we start broadening our lens of programming, of course, and coordination, and we try to do as integrated and as inclusive as possible. At some point, I think that granularity around the technical expertise may get lost. Not that there's no need for it, but maybe that like the limited resources and the attention goes to too much maybe to one side, and the other side, like the technical expertise going in depth could look like it's being compromised. That's a fine balance, of course. So sometimes it's we're more successful, sometimes not when we go. I think it also depends maybe on the type of response that we're coordinating. Some of them are, of course, a lot more in need of very strong technical support. So that's also, I think, we see in our partners, especially partners if they're not, if they deal with multiple sectors in their agency, that balance is constantly shifting. So we could, of course, look at also, you know, advocacy points that come out of that. Like if something is going too far to one side of that scale, what are the risks? It's happening at the cost of what? I remember that we had discussed this, I think, maybe last year or maybe even in the meeting before. So if we could, I don't know, maybe it was even Charles Perrick from Oxford Brookes who was saying that we need to come up with messages of what it comes at the cost of. So that could be also something for both of those post-its to have those messages. If we go too much shelter, what does it come at the cost of, and the other way around. So maybe that's something to look at from an advocacy point of view. It's happening within the agencies. I know it from my own. Now that it's almost as if it's not valued to have technical sectors. It all has to be grouped under other themes. So it's not an easy one, but it is a concern, I think, or at least for me. I think it's also a concern for colleagues who have written it. So yeah, that's one thing. And the other one is the too many working groups. I mean, our working groups are we set them up on demand, so it's not our own idea in a SAG or wherever we think they meet a need. But of course, if they don't, or if the country clusters would like to propose other working groups or areas that are more useful for them, or there are some gaps that they have identified, there is always the possibility to add more or adjust or look at these ways of being more relevant for their needs. And also one last point, I think that we do have some activities in the coming months that hopefully will bring the tools closer to the country levels by at least for making them available in the different languages, making it easier for people to access. So maybe that's one small step in that direction, but of course it's also something that we really would like to hear from different country clusters on what would be successful for their context and the type of work that they do. I think maybe looking at the time, we should move to the other boxes. Somebody's drawing very nice lines, so I think that's hopefully that's Leanne or Augusto, because I only see them as anonymous squirrel.
Sorry, yes, that was me. I was just trying to group some of the main ones because I'm just conscious of the time. But in terms of challenges, and I'm sure yourself and Brett will have a lot to say about some of these. I mean, COVID obviously is a big one. You know, that COVID post-it note could have taken up the whole square, and that ongoing connectivity to be able to actually do the work. The other big one is, as is often in this discussion, is that lack of funding or capacity to support in-country clusters, and then sort of bringing them into these GSC events and more broadly to other events within the cluster. There's one sort of link to that, which is about looking at needs and gaps compared to like different countries and how that's sometimes gets different kind of attention at different levels. And then, I mean, there's a lot here, so I know you won't have time to get through it all, but one talking about innovation, I guess, and how much we can embrace like different ideas and being flexible for the times, just because we're all a bit slow moving, and differing opinions about what the scope of the GSC should be. So I will let you comment on those main ones.
Thanks, Leanne, for the overview. Much appreciated. And I really like the artistic lines as well. You can see the hand of the architect there.
Yes, thank God for that technical capacity.
Indeed. I mean, I think that one of the larger one that you've circled there, this is a point of discussion that's ongoing in, you know, different senses. There's a lot of different layers to it. Of course, each of the clusters at field level are quite different. They all operate in really different ways and have different issues to confront. Of course, there's the broad definition that we draw in terms of whether they're conflict related or natural disaster, but in the end, a lot of the country level nuancing is around the size of the country, especially if there's subnational coordination going. The issue, if it's a cyclical and ongoing crisis, and also for a lot of the conflict related responses, there's a lot of low-level conflict that's going on. So you might have parallel processes going. Some parts of stability in the country where we can move on with, you know, more developed shelter responses, other parts of the country which might remain really in protracted crisis for years, and an NFI, an emergency shelter response, is still carrying on. I also think that, you know, the mechanics of how we fund things at country level happen through the interagency coordination process, largely through HRPs. There's also bilateral funding that goes in, but it's essentially through the funds that are distributed through HRPs and through country-based pool funds and SURF funding. Now, if donors are not supporting that, there is, of course, disparity between some countries and the other, and that isn't controlled by the global cluster. What we do to try to redress that, or kind of find some balance in that process, is back to advocacy and back to our kind of lobbying efforts at headquarters. So there are limits around how we can redress that imbalance, but it's something that we know, and it's something that we know very well on the relative gaps in funding in many countries. So when we're providing full shelter solutions, no, I wouldn't say that. And that is normally not part of the coordination of the shelter cluster. And that kind of funding doesn't go through the shelter cluster either. In most cases, there may be exceptions, but in very few cases that I'm aware of. Or lack of connection between academia and humanitarian agencies. I think traditionally there has been, but I think that we're really going to be able to do a lot to redress that. There's been a big emphasis since our strategic advisory group retreat 2 years ago on research and academia and what progress we can make against the evidence-based response and those efforts. Okay, we've got someone there who's not muted. Could you please mute? Mizanur Rahman, thanks very much. Thanks very much. That's great. Sorry to name, but it's easy that way when we've got a big group online. So I think we're making good progress on that academic connection, and I foresee that a lot of the gaps that have existed there in the past will be able to redress that balance pretty substantially as a focus of this year's work and beyond. Ella, do you see anything else there that you'd like to comment on?
Yeah, I mean, more for us, I think, to pay attention to as we go forward. It's again the point of lack of implementation of the knowledge exchange. So I guess we really need to pay attention as a collective group how the knowledge and expertise that's being produced can be useful and can be disseminated. That's has already come up in different boxes. So while it can be a synergy, a concern, or a challenge at the same time, it definitely merits attention. That's what I see. Yeah, and the lack of funding and different avenues of funding. Yeah, that is also a part of our reality here, even though it's a difficult one to manage. But yeah, and yes, COVID-19, yeah, it's a challenge, but I think in some ways it has also made us much more flexible and put localization and national actors in the fifth gear. I think that's also something that we should explore how we can build on. And I would like to read that really long contribution, but we'll do that maybe also later on as the support team to see if there's anything that we need to respond to also separately.
Yeah, we might be able to see what progress we can make in some of these issues, of course, throughout the duration of the meeting in the next couple of weeks, and then reflect back during the closing session on what progress we've made. I just think in the interest of time, we'll move on to the final quadrant of issues and comments there on opportunities. Augusto, what have you made of that? And can you kind of give us some of the highlights of what you've been collating there?
Yes, so lots of opportunities, it seems. I picked just a few themes that are very recurrent. So first is capacity building. There is a lot of emphasis on the quality and the capacity building of the colleagues, especially on sustainable energy, because it's transforming the sector. We need to build our skills. And this includes training on solar energy, housing, insulation materials, and the like. The second is about rental market interventions. So there is the opportunity on top of the standard interventions that we do to include also activities that support lessor-tenant relationships, because this is a critical access to a critical aspect to ensure access to and retain of housing, right? The The third comment is about inclusion of field experience in our global work that we do. So making sure that the working groups and the COP are learning spaces that integrate the perspective of field staff. And then the last general comment, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, is that a partner pointed out the fact that for Shelter, there is a lot of donor interest right now, more and more global recognition of the importance of Shelter in the humanitarian affairs. And they suggest that it's a good time to provide guidance that acknowledge the fact that the shelter assistance has a big impact on the affected population. So what do you think about this? Obviously, feel free to provide comments on the other points as well.
Thanks, Augusto, and Ella, if you've got some feedback on these ones as well, maybe if I just respond initially to what you mentioned last first. I think that, certainly earlier in the year, we recommenced the donor consultation group. And so we've invited 5 donors to be part of that consultation group, including ECHO, BHA, World Bank, DFID, and SDC at this stage. And there's active interest and participation by all of those donors. We hope to expand that more in the future. So we're aware of the dialogue and what has to happen around that and making steps to work on those things. So on the donor interest, global recognition, etc. I think that's critical. I also think, and as maybe concentrated a bit more on in the meeting last year, was the effect and impact of COVID-19 on the reframing and redirecting of some discussions around collective humanitarian action. Of course, as we know on the Nexus, and as I mentioned, that's in the session tomorrow, we're looking at Nexus-related issues. But really in light of COVID, that we, reframing outcomes against health, human health. And, there's been an emphasis last year and there's an emphasis this year on health and shelter, including people's living conditions. And we know that for COVID as well, that those people that are at higher risk are the ones that are living in impoverished living conditions, including inadequate access to water and sanitation. So those that are overcrowded and living in poor conditions have poorer health outcomes. COVID's a good example, but there's many other examples of that. So I think that this kind of multi-sector, longer-term impact of shelter is something that the advocacy role can work on, something that the research role can work on, as both I mentioned earlier, Pablo mentioned as well. These kind of multi-sector impacts are what we're advocating strongly with for donors, and also the key issues that have been brought up as part of what we need to recognise as a result of COVID. We've had some good forums last year with in partnership with Oxford Brookes and CARE, and the same again this year, and we're devoting another session in our Global Shelter Cluster meeting to health and shelter as well. So I think we're approaching these on different levels and in different kinds of ways where they fit well. I might cease my comments there. Ella, if you have anything as well, I'll hand over to you.
Sorry, that wasn't for you. My son just decided to say hi. So that's a challenge and the opportunity of working from home. But I just want to pick on the energy comments. I think I see 2 or 3 in there, which is very interesting. And it's also maybe partners will remember that we had the discussion around energy when the early recovery cluster was discussing to phase out. Energy was something that they were thinking that we could take on as a cluster, but at that time we were not so sure at which level we would bring most value to that discussion. And I think it's something that we haven't dedicated that much thought and energy in our cluster, but it's something definitely that we need to look at household and possibly settlements level. And in this regard, I think some of our partners are more experienced or knowledgeable or advanced in their thinking, and also maybe have gone through some like restructuring or regrouping to bring the energy expertise into the shelter or WASH technical field. So we would very much welcome their leadership and thought process on that to make some advances, because it's also in our ECHO project, but it's still something that we would need to, of course, unpack a little bit to see where we can add value and with whom we need to work and with which clusters we need to coordinate further. So that's something that just caught, it is an opportunity that we should really try to capitalize on in the coming years. And also on the rental market thing, I think there's a lot happening on the rental market area, especially COVID has also highlighted that need. It requires a different kind of technical expertise, of course, and a lot of collaboration, again, luckily with other sectors, colleagues from cash, maybe migration, of course, HLP expertise is super relevant for that. So I think we are also looking at that and look forward to getting more confident in the rental market interventions. I think I'll stop here also because of the time. And maybe Brett, you'll provide us with the outlook for the coming days.
Yeah, I'll make a few final comments, and I think we've got a couple of minutes now, maybe just a minute or two for Pablo and Miguel to give us an overview of the 2 weeks we have ahead, a description of what kind of happens in the open space sessions, the networking sessions, and the thematic sessions, so that everybody can look at the agenda ahead and make some choices around what you want to prioritize and participate in. So thanks, and thanks very much to Leanne and Augusto for facilitating the Jamboard. That was really great. Thanks everyone for posting your comments in that, and we'll continue working on them and extracting and revisit toward the end of the meeting in 2 weeks. So thanks very much. Over to Miguel and Pablo.
Thank you, Brett. Very briefly, because we're arriving to the end of this session, just to give you an overview of what lies ahead of us in this virtual Global Shelter Cluster Meeting 2021. So today we have the opening session. Tomorrow we have 3 different sessions. The networking session, Asia Pacific. So everyone is invited to this session, but basically, those with a focus on Asia Pacific are probably the ones that will find it more interesting and relevant. These networking sessions are about chatting informally. We will break out in groups of 3, 4 maybe, and we will have a bit of a chat, informal chat, just to know each other. It's kind of the substitute of a coffee break. Then we will have updates for the working groups and communities of practice. We will have 2 of these sessions, one on Tuesday, the other one on Wednesday, where the working groups will give an overview of what they are doing. This will be very short sessions, one after the other, and we will be able through them to see the 8 working groups and the 3 communities of practice. And then in the afternoon of Tuesday, we will have the first thematic session about navigating the nexus on urban issues. On Wednesday, we have the second thematic session on shelter and health. We continue with the update from the working groups and communities of practice, and then we will have the second networking session, this time with a focus on Africa. On Thursday, we will start with the open space sessions. As you will remember, the open space sessions are on a theme that people were interested to host. So in this case, we will have the colleagues from BRI presenting the life cycle analysis tool to assess carbon footprint on humanitarian shelter interventions. And then we will have our second plenary session on Thursday at this same time. It will be an Ignite panel where we will have very senior and knowledgeable colleagues who will explain about shelter and settlements in a changing environment, different perspectives. We will have people from the Office of the Undersecretary General on Climate Change. We will have colleagues, actually the resident coordinator from Burkina Faso, and other colleagues that will present on this interesting topic. And then we will continue with open space sessions. This time we will have one on post-disaster retrofitting, and another one on WASH and shelter programming. This is with the WASH cluster. And then we will have the second week, the week after, we will have a number of other sessions. I invite you to go to the website and look at them. We will continue with a number of other thematic sessions on green the response, multi-sectoral impact of shelter, coordination, more networking and open space sessions. And then we will finish with the closing session on Thursday, 17th. After these 2 weeks of core events of the Global Shelter Cluster meeting, we will still have the country presentations. Here at the bottom of the page, you have the first 2 ones, but we will continue having country-level presentations every Wednesday from 2 to 3 Geneva time until the month of September. So you will be able to see all the clusters. If there are any questions on the meeting, please put them on the board, on the chat. And I will hand over now to Brett for the closing works. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Miguel, for the overview of the 2 weeks we have ahead. I'll literally keep my comments just to less than a minute, but to thanks everyone so much for participating in the opening session. It's been great. It's been great to have the feedback, great to have the participation. So thanks on behalf of Ella, my co-lead, and thank you to all for being available. Thanks to the Global Shelter Cluster support team for all the hard work over the last month to pulling the event together. As you can all imagine, there's a huge amount of work to go into creating all the sessions, organizing the content, organizing the speakers and the notes and everything, and the technology behind that. So thank you to all of you, Pablo, Miguel, Angel, Renee, Neil, Shirin, and I hope I haven't missed anyone else out, but thank you to everyone. And I wish you all the best for the next 2 weeks. We've got a remarkable amount of really interesting sessions. I think everyone will learn a lot. Please contribute a lot. You're all experts in your field. You've got a lot to contribute that everyone can learn from. So don't be shy to step forward and participate and share your knowledge and experience. And so that's it from my side. So thanks, everyone. And we'll see you hopefully all for the sessions continuing tomorrow. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
All right, thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
See you in the next session.
Thank you.
Bye.